Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ontario Energy Board's third annual Policy Day. I am so pleased that you've made it a priority to be here with us today. If you're a Policy Day veteran, welcome back. And if you're new to this forum, you are now part of a very special group of more than 200 people who represent the best and the brightest in Ontario's energy sector. And we need each and every one of you to join us in facing the challenges of this once-in-a-generation energy transition. But before we begin, I would like to deliver the OEB's corporate land acknowledgement. The Ontario Energy Board acknowledges that our headquarters in Toronto is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This area is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful for the opportunity to gather and work on this land and recognize our shared responsibility to support and be good stewards of it. Like many of you, the OEB recently observed the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Our guest, Kevin Lamoureux, an award-winning scholar from the University of Winnipeg, described the 94 calls to action as a gift. He challenged everyone at the OEB to understand why they were made and how the fulfillment of each would make Canada a better nation. It was a powerful conversation. And more powerful conversations await us. Today is our third annual Policy Day, and it's great to have such an impressive turnout from across the sector and beyond. As many of you have heard me say before, there is room for everyone at this table, and the best solutions are those developed when many voices are heard. For this year's event, we drew on your feedback and our learnings from our previous two Policy Days. Lynne, Carolyn, Harneet, and I are here in person at the OEB offices and will conduct our roundtable discussion face-to-face for a more authentic experience for you and for us. And we've added more flexibility in how you can participate. We recognize that many people in your organization may be interested in accessing specific parts of the Policy Day program. So we've opened up the plenary portion of the agenda while finding ways to make our breakout rooms small to enable meaningful dialogue with OEB subject matter experts. As you know, the theme of today's event is regulatory decision-making, delivering for today, and planning for tomorrow. Because any organization worth its salt does just that. But as we're all learning, delivering for today and planning for tomorrow in the face of the energy transition can present major challenges. Rest assured, they're challenges that the OEB is addressing head-on. And we seek to tackle them collaboratively with the support of the sector as a whole and that of the Ministry of Energy. It's the Ministry of Energy, after all, in its annual letter of direction that sets the expectations for a lot of the work we do on the policy side of the House. That's in our annual letter of direction to us. As we anticipate this year's letter, I'll just remind you of some of the major initiatives that came our way in last year's letter. Let's start with advising the Electrification and Energy Transition Panel. We also reported to the Minister of Energy on resiliency, responsiveness, and cost efficiency. We issued guidance on DER adoption, and we're delivering a fully integrated EV action plan. These projects and the expanding scope of the letters of direction we receive are a testament to the fact that we are no longer your average regulator. We are being asked to take on new accountabilities and deliver more when it comes to the energy transition. And I am confident that no other energy regulator in Canada is showing this level of activism on behalf of the consumers it serves or the entities it regulates. It's a position of leadership that we have earned over the past 3 years and that we intend to maintain as we look to the future. But I want to assure you that while we're planning for tomorrow, we are delivering for today by carrying out our core adjudicative duties here and now. We do that, as always, with an unwavering commitment to accountability, certainty, and independence. For example, this summer, we held one of our longest hearings in years with Enbridge Gas. It lasted more than 3 weeks and operated in a fully hybrid format. We took the best of being in person, added the best of remote, and created a new standard for excellence in adjudicative hearings. Overall, with the exception of one loose cable on the first day, the hearing was seamless, efficient, and effective. Also on the topic of adjudication, our mid-year adjudicative dashboard report is just days away from being published. It was an initiative we undertook several years ago to hold ourselves accountable to you by setting and monitoring targets on decision cycle time, and to give you greater certainty about the timeliness of decisions on your applications. So here, exclusively for those participating in Policy Day, are the top-level results for the first 2 quarters of our fiscal year. Since April 1st of this year, we've issued 120 decisions. This year, in the spirit of continuous improvement, we've added a new metric to our dashboard. It now specifies how often the target metric is met for delegated decisions versus for panel decisions, because the latter are often more complex and require more time. We are pleased to report that 94% of panel decisions and 100% of delegated decisions met or surpassed our performance standards for timeliness. And you'll find more analysis of our adjudicative dashboard in our Chief Commissioner's letter to the sector, which she'll send out later this month. While we're satisfied with our results for the first 6 months of the year, we will not stop pushing ourselves, because that is what Ontario's energy sector demands and deserves. And while we are closely measuring our performance, the bottom line is that we will never rush a decision for the sake of meeting a metric. We will always ensure that our adjudication is procedurally fair, because we know that it's better to get it right than simply get it done. Today is no different. So, before I join my colleagues for our panel, I'd like to outline our goals for today. Quite simply, the OEB hopes to accomplish 3 things. We want you to understand our work for the year ahead, and we need to understand your priorities for that work. We want to give you confidence that we are taking action, making difficult choices, and getting things done when it comes to both our adjudicative work and our regulatory policy projects. And finally, we want to tap into your collective insights and advice to ensure that the OEB is able to contribute to Ontario's competitive energy advantage. If we succeed in achieving those 3 goals, this afternoon will have been time well spent. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Aisha Bukhari, who has kindly agreed to moderate our panel. Aisha is an energy transformation leader who is passionate about clean energy, innovation, and social justice. She's an electrical engineer, a thoughtful leader, and an entrepreneur. Her resume includes impressive work at the Mars Discovery District and leading and developing smart grid solutions at Toronto Hydro. She sits on the board of the Pembina Institute, and she's also the Vice President of Women in Renewable Energy. Wow, we are so pleased that she could be with us here today to moderate the panel. Aisha, over to you.
Thank you, Susanna, for that warm introduction. And it is my pleasure to be here today with all of you and steering this conversation. To get us all started, I would like to introduce our rockstar panel here. Joining Susanna, we have our Chief Commissioner, OEB's Chief Commissioner Lynne Anderson, Chief Operating Officer Harneet Panesar, and Chief Corporate Services Officer and General Counsel Carolyn Calwell. Before we dive into the details of things, I just want to lay out some context as well as our game plan for today. So today we are going to be hearing candid insights from our team of awesome panelists here. We are going to be hearing about what are some of the things that are driving OEB's current strategies, as well as how are you navigating some of the things in the future. We will have 2 rounds, each 20 minutes long. After this first round, we are going to break into the breakout sessions, and then we will be reconvening again at 3:15. Okay, ready? Okay, so with that, my first question is going to be directed towards all of you. Susanna, in your opening remarks, you just talked about the letter of direction and all the things that the OEB has done last year. So just reflecting back over this current fiscal year, as well as OEB's business plan, what are some of the headline stories for you? And Susanna, would you like to kick us off?
Okay, great. Thank you for the question. For me, the first 6 months of this fiscal year has really been about 3 big rocks. One is providing our very best advice to the Electrification and Energy Transition Panel, the Dave Colley panel. 2 has been our advice to the Minister of Energy around distribution sector resiliency, responsiveness, and cost efficiency. There's so much work that went into both of those pieces that really took a great deal of effort for us over the first half of the year. And the third thing is the effort itself, the people of the OEB. We've made a really purposeful investment in our organization by bringing the right people in, by making sure that the people who are here have the tools and skills that we need to be ready to regulate the energy transition for Ontario. So those are my top 3 for the first 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Carolyn, over to you.
Aisha, there's so much I'd like to profile. From my vantage point, where I work with the back office functions of the OEB, as well as our strategic policy and our legal teams, I could point to our work on our stakeholder engagement framework, the development of our Engage With Us platform, our massive recruitment effort to bring the right talent into the OEB. There's so many things I'd love to talk about. But I think what I'll focus on is our electric vehicle initiative, and specifically 2 streams of work underway there. First, we started with a stakeholder survey, and that was really important to help us understand what all of you need from us. And that informed directly 3 pieces of work. Some new filing guidelines to help support EV-related investments. It helped with our innovation handbook, which is meant to be a compendium of resources that can help our regulated stakeholders identify decisions and things that the OEB has done in the past that can help inform what they do today. And as well as our investment letter, which was intended to help people understand what we're looking for when people bring investment propositions to the OEB and applications. So that's one really important piece of work. And the second is our work on delivery costs. And that work isn't yet done, but a lot of work has gone into it so far. We started with a consultant's report, we've talked to our stakeholders about it, and we're working on proposals now to address those costs and recognize them as a pain point for those who do EV charging and fleet charging.
Thank you for those insights, Carolyn. Harneet, would you like to weigh in, please?
Sure, yeah. I think the first one I want to talk about is work that we've done in terms of amendments to our distribution system code and transmission system code related to end-of-life assets. We know that with energy transition, there's going to be a need for more capacity in the system, but we also have aging infrastructure that we need to deal with in a prudent manner, and we need to build out in the right spots. Information sharing is going to be critical to make good decisions, and the changes that we've made to the code will help information sharing between our system operator, our distributors, and our transmitters. So that's one piece of work that I'm really proud of. The next thing that I want to talk a little bit about is work associated with our monitoring function. You know, our job is to protect electricity and gas consumers, and we do that partly by also monitoring the sector. And that means we need to make sure we're collecting data that is useful and that we're getting it from the right sources. We started a stewardship program last year to make sure we could identify where are we getting the data, is there better sources of the data, and we work with the sector to make sure that we streamline that. With that, we produced an interactive infographic that is available on our website for transparency to show you where is the data coming from and where is it going and how is it being used. The other thing we did is we launched open data for the public of non-confidential data that we collect. That's going to help bring the data in XML formats to data scientists, to universities and other institutions that are going to benefit from having access to the data. And we've even seen articles just last week within the Globe and Mail sourcing some of the data that we've published just last week in our second round, known as Open Data 2.0. And lastly, we know not everyone is a data scientist, but we want to make sure people have insights that they can gather. We created an interactive dashboard focused on reliability of our utilities, and folks can find that on our website to gain insights on what are some of the causes of the outages, what is the performance of some of the utilities. It's all accessible and available on our website.
Thank you, Harneet. Lynne, over to you.
Oh, thanks. And you heard Susanna mention that we had our first ever hybrid hearing. And so I won't spend too much time other than saying what I'm proudest there of is how the panel of commissioners and the staff team at the OEB and all of the stakeholders involved really all work together to make that very first foray into that hybrid world work out so well. And so I'm really proud that we made that step forward. Another thing we did is we've just recently come up with a new notice for our applications, and I don't know how many people have seen it yet. I've been around the OEB long enough to have seen more than 10 years ago when our old notice was 8 font and very legalese, and we decided that wasn't good enough, and we thought we were moving into the world of very consumer-centric notices, and it was a leap forward, but we realized this year it wasn't enough. And so now the team at the OEB worked together and engaged with a consumer panel to come up with a notice that's now, I like the word pithier, and it's concise. It's to attract interest to the proceeding, and so I think we're moving into the world also where we're pointing people to our website for more information. So I'm kind of proud of that initiative. And with it recently, we've also updated our form for letters of comment, because we want to hear from consumers, we want to hear from customers, and so now we have this form that will make that easier and make it easier for us to manage those. And we do read them, we really do, so it makes that easier as well. And finally, last year at Policy Day, we did the prioritization of our adjudicative policies, more than 60 of them. And there's a breakout group today on that as well. Looking forward to hearing from that. But what we've been working on this year is the outcome of that, and that is our what we fondly call our MADS policy: mergers, acquisitions, amalgamations, and divestitures. And throughout the summer, we've engaged with 8 LDCs and 5 intervenor groups. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the results of that, where the staff is busy consolidating all of that input. And those comments, so that we can move forward and to get greater input on where we'll move with that policy.
Thank you, Lynne, for sharing that. It seems like certainly it has been a busy and very productive year for the OEB, so congratulations. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things you've mentioned, starting with the non-adjudicative side of operations. Carolyn and Harneet, this question will be for you. As we are going through this energy transition, it is dynamic, there are a lot of uncertainties. So how is the OEB sort of navigating, providing clear and actionable guidelines to the distributors while ensuring that they're not boxed in with too many specifics and being prescriptive? So where is the wiggle room and where does the flexibility come from? Carolyn, why don't you get us started?
Thanks very much, Aisha. One thing we've tried to do with our framework for energy innovation is introduce some mechanisms that allow LDCs to develop mechanisms that work for them. So we created 3 incentive streams: one related to performance, one related to shared savings, one related to a pure margin on payments. And we've asked LDCs to tell us how that can work for them by saying, you define the term, you define the methodology, but come to us with a proposal that allows you to use these mechanisms to adopt DERs. And this was one way we were trying to level the playing field for DERs, to make it possible for LDCs to look at these as non-wires alternatives and see if they were viable options to advance their systems. So that's one way we've tried to introduce some flexibility.
Thanks for sharing that, Carolyn. Harneet?
Sure, yeah. So, regulatory guidance, I think, is just so important, especially in an era where you're going through energy transition. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of new thinking that needs to be explored. I'll plug our IRE process, which is Industrial Relations Inquiries. We got about 350 of them last year, and our commitment is when you have questions and you'd like some feedback, we'll get back to you within 10 business days, 90% of the time. There's 10% that might be adjudicative or far more complex, requiring more time. But we really appreciate all the folks that have been reaching out to us and having conversations that stem to provide guidance. To give you some examples of some of the guidance that we've issued over the last little while, one, load forecasting is getting more and more challenging. Utilities are experts in load forecasting. We want to provide guidance on how do you take into account new things like EVs and heat pumps into your load forecasting, and those considerations, how do they get folded in? The other is how do you build adequate distribution systems to accommodate the changes with EVs and heat pumps coming on board. We also, we're not prescribing, we're just providing guidance, really around, what is an adequate servicing for customers. The 100 amp service may not be adequate, and we know most utilities are now offering 200. There's still some that are offering 100, but we're trying to provide guidance that, we think 200 amps from a guidance perspective is appropriate. So, there's a few tangible pieces that we've been getting out with through our bulletins and through our IREs to make sure that we're providing guidance out to the sector.
Yeah. Thank you for those insights, and it's great to see that OEB is proactively managing this emerging technologies and solutions that are coming up. Turning to Lynne on the adjudicative side of operations, from your perspective, how are yourself and your team of commissioners managing the challenges and opportunities that the energy transition brings, while ensuring that you're aligned with the OEB objectives?
Yeah, thanks. And of course, the challenge in talk of adjudication is I'm never going to talk about live adjudicative cases.
Yeah.
But what I will say is my favorite word is balance, balance, balance. That's what we do. We are always, and it's not balancing as in, a scale, one thing off of the other. It's multidimensional. We've got a whole slew of objectives that we have to consider. So, we all know about protecting consumers, price, reliability, quality of service, but we also have to consider, facilitating the maintenance of a financially viable sector in both electricity and gas, and facilitating innovation. So it's kind of multidimensional. Another dimension of that is time. We can't think in terms of just the short term. Certainly with the energy transition, we also have to be thinking very long term. So that's kind of what we do. How do we do it? Okay, that's the $1 million question. It starts out with the applicants. So the applicants have to put together that business case, and we love our numbers, but that business case needs to tell the story, needs to tell us why this is a good thing, and it needs to, it could be the same story that they've told their board of directors. It's why is this a good thing, and why is it something that a commissioner, a panel of commissioners should be approving? And interveners need to think both in that short term and long term. So we can't be just thinking of this next period, but how does this impact the longer term? And for commissioners, they'll always be thinking about the risk of going too slow, the risk of going too fast. And so, as the parties in the proceeding help the commissioners understand that. And so one of the important things there is that they need to consider the broader context in which we operate. And I guess I see that's part of the role of the chief commissioner. While I'm a staunch defender of the independent adjudication, I try to find opportunities for the commissioners to understand the broader context. We often say we're independent, we're not isolated. And so that's really the important, I think one of the important jobs of the chief commissioner is trying to find those opportunities.
Thanks for that, Lynne. Susanna, my next question is for you. You talked about the letter of direction in your opening remarks. I know we're all curious to hear and are anticipating the new letter of direction. Can you give us some insights into what the OEB is expecting and what are the associated timelines?
Excellent. Well, thank you for the question. The letter of direction has become an annual document that the OEB receives from the ministry, and it's really helpful in terms of shaping some of the priorities. So we don't have currently a letter of direction for the upcoming year, but we still have last year's letter of direction, and we're working very hard on that to make sure that we can get done on all of the things that are in that letter, and many of them have just been mentioned here by my colleagues. In terms of inputs to the letter of direction, we obviously, on the non-adjudicative side of the House, have conversations with the ministry and are involved in them in many of our regulatory policy consultations, the work that we do. But I would say there's some other inputs to the letter of direction which people watching this conversation will know of, and that is, of course, powering Ontario's growth, very instructive for the province as a whole, actually for the whole country. So that's obviously an important input. As well, too, we include our advice that we've given to the Collie panel on electrification and energy transition, and the resiliency work that I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks. So those are, of course, all inputs. As well, the sector itself provides inputs to the ministry and the minister around what might be included. And so I know many in the audience today will have done that directly, either through their associations, the EDA or the OEA or others, or directly. And we welcome and encourage that. And so that's sort of the inputs to it. And we'll do like we have done in previous years. When we receive the letter of direction, we'll take it in stride. We'll do the analysis of it. We'll start to prioritize what needs to be done. And with the input from Policy Day today, the letter of direction, we'll craft a business plan for the coming year that allows us to really prioritize the things that need to get done. So very iterative process. Policy Day is a big part of it.
Thank you, Susanna, for those insights. I know a lot of us will be eagerly anticipating this letter and the implications for OEB on that. Before we go into the breakout rooms, I would love to hear from each one of you, starting with Susanna. Any pro tips for our stakeholders who are with us here today on how they might approach these conversations in the breakout room?
Pro tips. All right. Well, for me, really, what I would really like to see from stakeholders going into the breakout rooms, number one, be honest, be open, and be constructive. That's really important for us in terms of hearing directly from you. The second piece of advice I would give is seize the opportunity. There is not another regulator in Canada who's inviting stakeholders in to have conversations around priorities and the work that needs to be done. So seize the opportunity. And I think number three is just really, I want people to know truly that what you say in these breakout rooms matters. As Lynne mentioned, we analyze what comes out of all of the consultations we do, but Policy Day is incredibly critical for us. So what you say matters. Seize the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynne?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of things that are going on in the breakout rooms. Every one of those breakout rooms has very influential things, and I'm very much looking forward to what the comments. We definitely took those comments last time, and they informed the work plan for this year. So we'll be doing the same thing as the business plan for the coming years is being completed.
Thank you. Harneet?
I'd say, look, we're looking to develop our work plan, but this is going to take multifaceted approaches. All of us have an important role to play. Your perspective is important to us. Diverse perspective is important to the OEB, and we welcome all the input you can give us today. So.
Thank you. And Carolyn?
Thank you. I would say put yourselves in our shoes, think about what we need to know, and give us your best advice.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all for this awesome first round of panel. I know we were looking at sort of what has happened in the last year, and after our breakout sessions, we will resume around 3:15. And we will have a more sort of forward-looking conversation and talk about net zero, greenhouse gas emissions, and some of other interesting technological innovations things as well. So for those of you who are going into the breakout rooms, you will be automatically placed into those now. And for the rest of you, we are looking forward to seeing you at 3:15. Thank you all, and we will see you in a little bit. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had meaningful and engaging conversations in your breakout rooms. Now we will pick up our conversation where we left off this morning. We talked about the work that the OEB is doing today and the tangible impact it is having. But innovation doesn't stop, so we will now turn our focus and talk about the future. So if we talk about Ontario and place it in the global context, how does that compare, and what is the next big thing for Ontario? Lynne, we will start with you.
Oh, well, obviously the next big thing for Ontario is the energy transition. But what I will say is when we talk with other regulators, it fascinates me to no end that we're all grappling with the same issues. Nobody has the right answer. We're all working hard to that future. And what I can say about the OEB is that we're all about transparency. And as Susanna mentioned in our opening, we're busily working on our performance standards, our mid-year performance standards, which should be going out next week.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Lynn. Harneet?
Okay, awesome. When we look at other jurisdictions across the globe, let's go across Canada.
Yeah.
We know that energy transition is needing a lot more EV infrastructure to be deployed. We're looking at how are other provinces doing it. And we know when we look at some provinces like Quebec and BC, they've got a standardized way of doing this. With the number of LDCs that we've got in the province, I think it's important that we standardize the process. And so based on that, we'll be releasing draft amendments to the code to be able to help facilitate the standardization of EV charging infrastructure to be rolled out across the province. That's across Canada. If I start looking down in the US, we're also adopting some of the best practices from that side. Green Button was something that the White House created through a competition to enable the exchange of consumer energy consumption data with consumers and third parties to really help them make better decisions on their energy usage. And we're deploying that here in Ontario, and by November 1st, we're expecting all utilities to be able to provide Green Button standard data to their customers. The other one that I'd mention is around cybersecurity. We work with departments and agencies in the US, and we adopt standards like NIST, which is the International Institute for Standards and Technology, to make sure that we're leading edge. So, working with other jurisdictions is really important to us. And lastly, I'll just mention that, us going out is one thing. We also bring in delegations from across the world to share some of our knowledge and really talk about what they're doing and share what we're doing here in Ontario.
Carolyn?
Thanks. Picking up on Lynn's and Harneet's comments, I've had the privilege of attending the World Forum on Energy Regulation that occurred in August in Lima, Peru, and it brought together regulators from around the world. And we spent a lot of time talking about the energy transition and what's happening in our jurisdictions. What issues are we as regulators trying to grapple with and handle to advance that cause? And so Ontario is not alone, Canada is not alone. And so following WIFR, I had the chance to pick up the same conversation with other Canadian energy regulators at a Camput conference. And so we're able to share information both nationally, internationally. I also have a chance to participate in what's known as the RETA committee coming out of Ofgem 26. It's the Regulatory Energy Transition Accelerator. I do that through the International Confederation of Energy Regulators, Technology and Innovation Working Group. So there are lots of conversations happening, lots of sharing of information, and lots of exchange of best practices. And we in Ontario can only benefit from that.
No, thank you for sharing that, and it is important and encouraging to see that the collaboration is happening not only within the stakeholders, but also nationally and internationally. Building on this theme of Ontario in a global landscape, which other jurisdictions are incorporating targets for net zero or greenhouse gas emissions? And where do you see Ontario coming in on that? And this question, I'll share it with Harneet and then Carolyn.
Sure. When we look at the impacts from climate change, we can talk about the mitigation aspect, and we should also focus on the adaptation. We know that we're seeing impacts from climate, whether it's low frequency but high impact materially, that's really impacting how our utilities are serving our customers. We need to make sure that we're helping utilities with good guidance, and based on our last letter of direction, we were asked to provide recommendation to the Minister's office around resiliency, responsiveness, and cost efficiencies. And we've given those recommendations at the end of June, and it's with the Minister's office, so I won't go into the details, but thematically, we're talking about things like operating planning and restoration performance, making sure that we're doing things the best we can. We're talking about things like communicating to the customers to help set expectations and give them information that they may need to make decisions. We're talking about continuous improvement, and also things like hardening of our own assets based on vulnerability assessments, but keeping prudency in mind. So climate change is impacting us, and we're trying to do what we can to make sure we're getting ahead of it.
Okay. Thanks, Harneet. Carolyn?
A lot of our work starts with a jurisdictional scan, and certainly our advice to the Electrification and Energy Transition Panel started in that very place. So we did a review of legislation from New York to New Zealand to see what other countries were doing around legislation that related to GHG reductions or net zero. And we looked at other instruments as well to be informed about the different levels of authority that can be provided to regulators to help us take on the task of the energy transition. Looking at that, we then developed our advice to the panel and came to the view that although our existing mandate allows us to look at net zero or greenhouse gas reductions, there could be an opportunity for greater clarity to the sector with a further change to our legislation. And that could benefit everyone by providing certainty, not just that we look at the issue, but how we look at the issue and help us move forward together to solve it.
Thanks for those insights. Shifting gears slightly a bit more, let's talk about technology and innovation. Artificial intelligence, big data, these are, and I know Harneet, you were talking about that a bit earlier, these are buzzwords, but also they're fundamentally reshaping how many industries are working. So what does that mean for OEB and how does that come into play? Lynne, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks, AI. So I know some people out there are probably wondering whether or not our decisions are going to be written by AI. And I can promise you that will not be the case. Don't be too disappointed in that. But when it comes to technology, AI and other technologies, there are incredible uses and things that we can do. But when it comes to that, I know at the OEB, I always turn to Harneet to help out with that on how we're going to use technology and what we do.
Sure. Let me talk about some of the evolution that we've gone through internally at the OEB, focusing on people, process, and technology. You know, the technology stack is fundamental to be able to deploy some of the tools that we talk about with AI and ML. But the other component to that is the inputs. And so going back to your earlier point, you know, we talked about data and the fact that we've got a lot of data and we've opened up a lot of the data. But we've also got more data that we're looking to shape and structure so that we can run supervised and unsupervised machine learning algorithms. You know, we have a call center that takes in emails, calls, and chats. We get between 6,000 to 10,000 interactions with consumers. So those are critical data points. We're also working with Bloomberg. We're part of Bloomberg's BNEF subscription, which gives us access to a whole bunch of econometric data, but other data around capital markets, where things are flowing and what's happening in the energy space. You know, coupling all the data together is going to be fundamental to be able to do some of this. And lastly, I'll just say that we're also digitizing a lot of our records, right? So a lot of our adjudicative records that are in paper form are getting digitized, and there will be optical character recognition on them so that we can run AI and ML on them to get a sense of what's happening in them through cognitive search. That's something that anyone could be able to do based on those documents getting digitized.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those insights. Exciting times to be in the energy sector. My final question to wrap up our conversation. I know the letter of direction is going to come, but with sort of what OEB currently knows and what you have in plan for the next year, what are the top priorities and what is sort of the next big thing on your plate? Carolyn, we'll start with you.
One of the things that we need to get working on is our engagement with Indigenous communities. This is so important to us. And so we've been working on our environmental guidelines. We've been working on our intervener framework. Both provide opportunities for us to get to Indigenous communities and talk about how they work with us and work in the sector. And we're really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Lynne?
Yeah, and a bit of a change on a priority that we have for next year is having the right number, mix, and diversity of commissioners. So one of the things that we will be doing next year, we expect to be out recruiting for new commissioners next year, and I raise that to get people thinking about it when we do go out seeking for great candidates.
Susanna, you'll have the last word.
Oh, thank you so much. We've got so many interesting things going on. I mean, as the CEO, I really look out to the horizon and think about how we maintain our position in Ontario, how the OEB can be part of Ontario's competitive energy advantage. And so that involves days like today, having these sorts of conversations, getting our letter of direction, working on our business plan for the coming year, and really leaning into the comments that Lynne made earlier about our independence and our isolation, not coming at the expense of each other. I think that's really critically important. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Susanna. So with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists for an engaging, lively, and candid conversation. I know that I learned a lot and have a better understanding of how the OEB is approaching not only its current work, but also thinking about the future. And I hope the same for our audience as well. With that being said, I will now turn over the floor to Harneet, who will now facilitate the report back from the breakout sessions. Over to you, Harneet.
Okay, thank you, Aisha. And speaking on behalf of Susanna, Lynne, and Carolyn, let me say thank you for accepting our invitation to be part of Policy Day 2023. You've been an excellent moderator of today's panel discussion. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's been a great talk about what's happening here at the Ontario Energy Board and share how we're responding to the rapidly changing energy landscape. Now it's the moment we've all been waiting for, and that's to hear a little bit about the discussions in the breakout rooms. A complete summary of what was heard at Policy Day 2023 will be shared with everyone, so watch for that report to be emailed to you in the few weeks to come. But for now, we wanted to take some time while we're all here together to get a sense of the key takeaways from each of the breakout rooms. Starting with the topic of continued effectiveness of adjudicative policies and intervener participation in the hearing process, I'm going to ask Hatim Hassan to share a few words from the room that he facilitated. Hatim?
Thank you, Harneet. So as you mentioned, we tackled the adjudicative policy review exercise and the framework for participation for interveners. On the first room, the key takeaways was that participants generally agreed with the current policies identified and prioritized for review. However, the renewed regulatory framework was flagged as a priority, and it was noted that it might be a little challenging if it is reviewed in a fragmented way. Also, questions were raised regarding how intuitive it is to review cloud computing as part of the cost of capital review. So the question was, should they be combined, or will it be better off if they were reviewed separately? And lastly, participants were also looking for clearer language on the applicability of certain policies to determine whether the policies impact electricity or natural gas customers, and so that the interveners can efficiently apply their resources. On the framework for intervener participation, two takeaways really. The cost for useful participation of interveners and experts need to be reviewed in the context of and in relation to the cost of the whole application, the total cost of the application. And the second takeaway is that the OEB shall consider intervener cost and bandwidth when planning the timing of policy reviews in relation to proceedings, whether consultations or applications. That'll be it. Back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hatim. Musab Qureshi, you were also facilitating a room that discussed this topic. Could you highlight a few of the key takeaways from that?
Hi, Harneet. Happy to summarize some of the key takeaways from our group. So 3 takeaways that I want to talk about. First, on the adjudicative policies, there was a number of comments on wanting more clarity on the part of the OEB on the process and the scope that's going to be followed for these policies. The idea being that a number of these policies may have 50 sub-areas, but interveners and stakeholders would find it helpful if we identify certain key sort of contentious areas that they can focus on, and that'll help them manage things on their end. So more on scope and process from the OEB, first takeaway. Second takeaway is to keep in mind that a number of these policies are not isolated. There's linkages all over the place. For example, the capital modules are linked with the consolidation policy. So there are linkages all over the place, so that the OEB, when it's doing these reviews, keep in mind these various linkages. So second takeaway, keep in mind the linkages. The third one was to do with intervener participation. So in that aspect of things, there's intervener participation in the policy review of things and on the adjudicative side of things. So the OEB should keep in mind both those side of things and try to keep a balance on intervener participation on the policy side of things and the adjudication side of things. That's it from me, Harneet. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Musab. We've had a lot of interest in the topic of developing a benefit cost analysis for local electricity system planning, characterizations of societal impacts, and hosted 4 rooms on that subject. Let's start from hearing from Andrew Bryn. Andrew, I know you're taking notes in 2 rooms. Could you share what you heard in those conversations?
Conversations overall, I think there was broad agreement that considering societal impacts to some degree in a BCA framework is something that the OEB should consider. Though obviously the way we would go about measuring those impacts, whether quantitatively or qualitatively, is still something that we would need to explore a little bit more deeply into. In terms of some more specific comments that we heard, the first is this idea of resiliency kind of taking prominence over some of the other kind of societal impacts that we considered with respect to kind of things like greenhouse gas reductions and certain other kind of environmental considerations, and of course, Indigenous reconciliation. Resiliency obviously is important because it has direct links to the provision of quality and sort of cost-effective energy services. And that was sort of the linkage that a lot of participants drew to that particular impact. Flexibility is also something that we kind of heard quite common throughout those conversations, this idea that a BCA framework needs to account for different characteristics and sort of challenges and sort of priorities that each individual distribution service area is kind of considering. And for example, that a benefit in one distributor service area might not be quantified the same as another's distributor service area. And finally, there's some other kind of factors that we should also be considering in social or these kind of societal impacts. Is one related to timing, this idea that a societal impact that might sort of gain certain prominence in today's world might change in the future. And also this idea of aggregation, whereby, you know, we don't want to consider one DR in isolation, but consider them more broadly as a suite of options that could potentially help to achieve some of these societal goals. And that's it for me.
Right. Thank you, Andrew, for that feedback. Katie Williams, you were taking notes in a third room. Could you share with us a bit of that conversation?
Thanks, Harneet. Our discussion was very similar to Andrew's rooms, and our main takeaway really was the potential unevenness of where benefits accrue versus who actually pays for it. And the second takeaway that we focused on was really the dimensions of impact. So in our breakout room, we discussed that many tend to think about the environment on a global scale, and sometimes often overlooking the local context. So it's essential to consider how individuals interact with their immediate surroundings, not just at home, but also at work, you know, on their commute. Are they thinking about the traffic lights, local businesses like coffee shops, and really the overall urban environment and how that impacts our decision in system planning? Thanks, Harneet.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Luba Jajarek, you were taking notes in the fourth room. The last word on developing a benefit cost analysis for local electricity system planning is yours.
Thank you, Harneet. So we had an excellent discussion, a lot of content, hard to summarize, but here it goes. We heard that some societal impacts should definitely be considered. And because it's such a broad definition, we need to look at which types of societal impacts are within OEB mandate, and we should be trying to quantify. So we heard that aspects such as GHG reductions, resilience, reliability, these can be quantified and OEB should consider. But other impacts such as environmental impacts, air quality, water quality, these are not clearly within the OEB mandate, and it'll be difficult, very challenging to include that in BCA analysis. We heard that because there is a difficulty in quantifying some impacts, it would end up being more cumbersome and creating more work than value would be produced. And a couple participants said, and I like to quote, you know, there is no shortcut to quantify what can't be easily quantified, you know, what's difficult to quantify. You know, and then finally, I'll say we heard a number of participants say that, you know, if we're going to look at societal impacts, there needs to be some government policy that provides direction, and so that there's some political accountability in that respect. So, like I said, we heard a lot, and I look forward to contributing along with my note taker Sophie to the more fulsome report back. But those were the highlights, and it was a great session. Thanks. Back to you, Harneet.
Awesome. Thanks, Luba. Let's move to the topic of EV charging accessibility. We're going to hear from Amrit Kuner first, who facilitated one of the two rooms exploring this topic. Amrit?
Thanks, Harneet. So our breakout room had a really engaging discussion on EV charging accessibility. We spent some time talking about markets and customer groups that might be at risk of being underserved, such as multi-unit residential buildings, rural communities, lower income customers, colder climate regions, and customers in older homes or buildings. We also discussed barriers to access, such as costs, access to sufficient grid capacity, and availability of reliable chargers. What really came through in our group was that as EV adoption and electrification in general grows, stakeholders will continue to take a holistic, collaborative, and balanced approach with their customers, and that should be the focus for the OEB as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Amrit. Richard Lanny, you facilitated the discussion in the other room. Let's hear from you.
Thanks, Harneet. To add to that, yeah, the barriers are kind of obvious. There's geographic barriers. We had attendees from Northern Ontario, attendees from well-built cities like Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, and the barriers that they face are both the geographic and a result of just the organic growth and where they operate. For example, a number of attendees indicated that they live in multi-unit residences or complexes, and they don't have access to domestic charging. So that's a barrier for them. For those who are in the new build sector, there's some concern about capacity. So they would encourage the OEB to promote investment into technologies, that can assist with the concerns. And one issue from a multi-unit residential complex representative was the fact that unit holders don't have access to the ULO charge, the ultra low overnight charge, because of the way that USMPs are required to pass on the bulk bill. So maybe there's something that can be done there as well. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Technology transformation, leveraging technology solutions to modernize how the OEB regulates, was the focus of 2 breakout room discussions and represents a big project for the Ontario Energy Board. Let's hear first from David Martinello, who facilitated one of those rooms. David?
Thank you, Harneet. There was a lot of interesting discussion during our breakout session. The first was the OEB looking at opportunities to leverage its website with regards to displaying and relaying live information and really extending upon some of the open data that we've been providing and collecting from regulated utilities, as well as looking at leveraging AI, machine learning, to really help and analyze and make sense of some of the data that we are receiving from utilities. In addition, there were thoughts about ways that the OEB could look at rate models and see if there's ways to update those and streamline a bit of that process to really make the regulatory process a bit more efficient. And lastly, in light of the success of the Enbridge oral hearing, I think it was noted that looking at ways to provide more hybrid or unique opportunities for individuals to engage in the adjudicated process would be a benefit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Megha Sharma, you facilitated the other breakout room. What were some of the key takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Harneet. Happy to report back that we had a productive session. Our first takeaway was similar to David's room, and that was that we're on the right path. One of the stakeholders shared that they attended our recent hybrid hearing and had a positive experience. So the OEB was encouraged to continue with this journey of leveraging technologies to transform our processes to be more hybrid and more digital. Our second takeaway was to leverage technology to make our processes more accessible, specifically by including more stakeholder groups. One keynote that we took away was to include stakeholder groups such as students to help build out our long-term view. Our last takeaway, and this was something that yourself, Harneet, and Carolyn touched on earlier today, so we have alignment, and it was about the challenge of cybersecurity and data protection. So we agree that technology should be leveraged as much as possible, and it's important for regulators to stay up to date digitally. However, cybersecurity should remain an important factor in all of our decisions.
All right, thank you, Megha. That brings us to the breakout rooms that had the regulator's role in implementing a distribution system operator, also known as a DSO model, in Ontario as their subject. A lot of interest in this topic as well, with 4 rooms dedicated to it. James Gravel, you were the official note taker in 2 of the rooms. Give us a sense of that conversation.
Absolutely, thank you. There was a large focus on regulatory guidance, cost recovery, and an idea that while uniformity might be desirable, interoperability is a principle that we should pursue and can pursue. We should consider the DSO as a type of evolution, and it's about recognizing an alignment of priorities from the many entities that are involved. The OEB has to take more of a role to lead this, especially in helping direct and ensuring initial investments made and planning around new capabilities were used to the best of their ability. This guidance is also for a consistent model. Rather than debating how do we go about nailing it, we want to see the actions and making sure that it is properly enabled. We do not want to take too much of a prohibitive approach in this way, but we also want to ensure that the legal framework, such as an example of the legal framework, can accommodate the DSO, and recognizing that this evolution will take time, and having that direction from the OEB around those such examples such as those foundational investments will help control that pace. Helping ensure that we are proactive in the issues that could arise will help ensure that the DSO can provide a very bright future for the OEB as well as its entities it works with.
Okay, great. Thank you, James. Thomas Ivanovich, you were also a note taker for 2 rooms. Can we hear some of the takeaways from them?
Yes, thank you, Harneet. What was particularly interesting was how both rooms kind of touched on similar topics, but then also brought their own perspectives to it. One of the first areas that I'd like to highlight for the wider group is the idea about compliance and affiliate relationships kind of came up with respect to the dynamic of open access for third parties and the dynamic that might materialize where a system operator may also have its own assets within the system that it's operating. Another key topic that came up in both rooms was the dynamic between an ISO and a DSO kind of system operators, where the bulk and retail systems can both identify their own needs, but will have their own perspective, and how to manage that dynamic for identifying kind of customer value and how they can extract value from that. And then finally, the last topic I'd like to highlight was related to data access and supporting investors or developers with respect to how they can understand where the opportunities are and how to participate with those potential assets within the distribution system. Thank you very much, Harneet.
Thank you, Thomas. Sounds like we've got some really good input. I love the dialogue that we've been hearing. I speak for all of us at the Ontario Energy Board when I say we sincerely thank you for your commitment that you've made in joining us today and contributing this afternoon. We've heard a lot of different ideas and opinions being shared, and it is all valuable information for us at the Ontario Energy Board to factor into our thinking as we go into developing our forward work plan. Before I say goodbye, let me pass the mic over to Susanna for a few final words. Susanna?
Thank you, Harneet. This has been a terrific afternoon. Here at the OEB, our Policy Day work isn't over yet, though. In fact, it's just beginning. Our next steps here are to review the notes from the breakout rooms, summarize them, and share them back with the sector. So if you were in a session that you wanted to attend but couldn't, don't worry, we've got you covered. And before I wrap, I'd like to quickly let you know what really resonated with me today. And as I've thought through this, it's been the process of the conversation as much as it has been the takeaways. With more than 120 participants in 14 breakout rooms, we've got a lot of work to do here at the OEB to bring together the ideas and the advice that you shared with us, so we thank you for that. So, Policy Day isn't just a one-way street, and it wouldn't work if it didn't work for you and include our stakeholder input, your input. What we heard from you today and your feedback in our exit poll will help ensure that the OEB is focused on the right priorities. Your input directly informs the projects that we'll outline in our 2024-2025 business plan. So please, take a few minutes to complete the exit poll today or in the next few days. You'll see a link to it in the chat right now, and it will also be emailed to you first thing tomorrow morning. I'd like to thank Lynne and Carolyn and Harneet for contributing to our panel today, and to Aisha for expertly navigating the conversation. My thanks as well to the OEB team who staffed the breakout rooms, facilitated the discussions, and was recording the rich conversations. And of course, the small but mighty team who have worked behind the scenes to deliver another invaluable Policy Day. You've all done a fantastic job. Lastly, and most importantly, I'd like to thank each of you, Policy Day veterans and newcomers alike, for participating today. Your advice is more valuable than you can ever know and will be carefully considered. Those who know me know my door is always open. please don't hesitate to get in touch to discuss anything we've touched on here today, or anything you didn't hear today but which you wish we would have raised. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Good night.